Okay, what we're going to talk about here is the recent outrage caused by the Labour peer, whereby he associated anybody who has a problem with the human rights regime in the UK and anyone who has a problem with the current relationship that we have with international law as a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Now, this has been absolutely shredded as patently absurd for many reasons, but the deepest source of its absurdity comes from the fact that it's legal nonsense, abject legal nonsense. I don't know if this guy is legally trained or not, but he didn't get his money's worth, put it that way. Right, so rejecting the human rights regime, and that's the official term, regime, does not make one a Nazi. This is this cult-like adherence to the Human Rights Act and its associated system by the liberal left is just embarrassing. The human rights system in the UK is no more significant than any other Bill of Rights or rights protection system anywhere in the world. We had a fully competent and functioning protection of rights in the UK before the Human Rights Act was incorporated in 1998. And really, I mean, I did part of my degree on this. I argue that the Human Rights Act in the UK, or the human rights regime, was essentially a failure in the UK. Because the human rights system is contingent upon and assumes that the complainant has access to a fair, legal, and competent judiciary and legal system. If the courts are crooked, if the courts are biased, if the courts are incompetent, if the courts are politically motivated, then the human rights system just vaporizes. It's not worth the printer. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. We have far fewer freedoms today than we did in 1997. Okay? Far fewer in terms of what we can say and what the state can do to us. But we're supposed to believe that the Human Rights Act is this precious golden idol enshrined into law. It's an abject failure, and my view is that it doesn't matter what rights you've got on the books. If the courts are dysfunctional, which they are, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whatsoever. I mean, one example of how the courts don't work in this country is, I forget the legislation, but it's the rule whereby previous convictions can be used as evidence against you in an unrelated conviction. For hundreds of years, the rule is that you could not bring up previous convictions of the defendant as evidence for a new crime, because you could only be prosecuted for the crime at hand. What we have now is a situation, it's a case where the prosecutor say, well, we can't really prove that he stole something, but he did do a lot of shoplifting when he was 12, so, he's a thief. That's basically what it allows. It allows the prejudicing of jurors by the state. And with it, fair trials is vaporized. So the human rights system is as dead as dodo. The other problem these liberals have is that the Human Rights Act has been grossly mutated and swollen to cancerous proportions far beyond its original intention. The human rights regime was never designed to prevent the deportation of serial pedophiles. Okay? It was designed to stop men in balaclavas banging on your door at 3 a.m. and saying, the state has deemed you an enemy and, put your dressing gown on, you ain't coming back. That's what it was designed to stop. And it largely failed in that. It was never designed to be used as an activist tool by hyper-liberal Blairite lunatics. And has been warped beyond its original context to such a degree that it's unrecognizable in terms of its original function. So this worshipping of the Human Rights Act by the liberal left is just embarrassing. There are many states that aren't parties to it. There were many states that were not fascist before they assigned themselves to it, and many states that have signed up to it have actually become far more totalitarian and aggressive towards their citizenry than they were before. So he fails on that point. Second point is even more disturbing. This idea that any state that rejects international law is somehow akin to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This is even more stupid. Firstly, the Third Reich adhered to international law when it suited it. It made treaties and pacts and all sorts of alliances with anybody and everybody it suited. That suited itself. The Germans were highly legalistic. Okay? So, when they undertook these things, they were twisting international law to serve their purposes. They didn't ignore it. They adapted it, as any good lawyer would. So, this idea that they rejected... When he says international law, he's talking about a very big subject. I presume he means international civil law. He might refer to international criminal law. I don't even think he knows the difference. But this idea that international law is somehow a protector and a controller of states is, again, constitutionally illiterate to a supreme level. International law does not exist in the UK unless Parliament allows it to have power. It is that simple. If a treaty conflicts with an Act of Parliament, the Act of Parliament wins every time, because the highest form of law in the UK Constitution is an Act of Parliament. It is that simple. I have read through and spoken to countless individuals who believe that a treaty is somehow sacrosanct, and if an Act of Parliament conflicts with it, the treaty wins. No, it doesn't. In some jurisdictions, I think in Holland, they have a clause in their constitution that says that international law must be adhered to over domestic law. Some jurisdictions it's true, but it's not true here. And it's a legal absurdity in terms of international law. International law is predicated on the existence of sovereign states, because it needs sovereign states to give their consent to the laws that they adhere to and create, and the treaties that they create. The power of the treaty does not come from the treaty. The power of the treaty comes from the states that signed up to it. It's like saying if person A and person B make a contract, it's like saying that the contract is all powerful. The contract has power over both parties. No, the contract exists to facilitate the relationship between both parties, and they can, if they so wish, change it as they deem applicable. So this idea that international law is this straitjacket over sovereign states is absurd. And the UK has broken all manner of treaties as and when it suits it, to a degree that I actually regard many of the treaties that we've assigned to be terminated via implication, but that's by the by. So again, it's this cult-like fetish worshipping of this higher power, international law. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay. But to equate the rejection of international law with the National Socialist German Workers' Party is absurd. The Germans were hyper-legalist and used international law to their advantage. In fact, I think they argued that they could mistreat Soviet POWs because the Soviets hadn't signed up to the relevant Geneva Convention. You know, that's a legal argument. Not a very good one, but it's what they did. Okay, we'll leave it there. Over and out.